It's the same as the sheer judge.
Alright, so hi everybody. We're going to get started with our panel on freelancing in journalism. Please join me in welcoming Robert Frank and Andrea Bennett. We're going to begin with the panelists giving a brief introduction about themselves, where they work, what kind of writing they do. So yeah, we can get started.
Oh, okay.
You want me to go first? I can.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Robert Frank. I'm your freelance speaker tonight. Right now, if you look at the masthead of the Suburban newspaper, which is the largest weekly paper in Montreal, you'll see my name listed as editorial staff. The editor, Beryl Wiseman, likes to have my name on there as editorial staff. I work as a freelancer for that paper, but I, like Tracy Ariel, who's in the audience here with me, and also freelances for them. We're regulars, but we're not employees of the company. I write for other publications right now. In the middle of, I just transcribed my notes from 11 interviews on commercial topics for a commercial publication that actually pays real money. Suburban is a paper that you do because of what it allows you to do. It has a combination of hyper-local coverage that most journalists will probably look down their nose at today, covering the local stuff that Jesse very astutely pointed out. The local city halls, school boards. School boards right here have budgets of over $250 million each, and I spent a lot of time covering Lester Pearson School Board over the last 5 years. Almost all of the time, the only journalist in the audience at the council meetings, despite the fact that the budget for that one school board dwarfs the entire city budgets of the entire West Island. Nobody's minding the store. Who's covering the courts today? There are a lot of very interesting stories that slip under the radar because nobody's covering it. Suburban combines that hyper-local coverage with advocacy journalism that actually in a journalistic tradition goes back to Ernest Hemingway and Martha Gellhorn. Watch the movie Hemingway and Gellhorn if you haven't learned about it before, where when we perceive an injustice, we don't stand as though we're observing from a distant planet through a telescope, that the newspaper will take up that cause. Background for me, I started off at CBC TV News, hosted a morning show for CBC on Baffin Island back when it was called Frobisher Bay, Northwest Territories, now it's Iqaluit, Nunavut. I worked for a bunch of different corporations in public affairs and went back to reporting for the New York Times in 1999 when Ahmed Rassam tried to cross the border from Canada into the United States. Did some very interesting reporting on terrorism, particularly from the Canadian dimension of it, including breaking the story that Al-Qaeda was operating in Canada. And then Joe Lilliveld retired for the first time and tossed the control over to Hal Raines, who was a disaster, fired my boss Steve Engelberg, who now heads ProPublica, who had also brought several Pulitzers to the paper, and his last firing before he himself was fired was Doug France, who had just commissioned me to do a in-depth feature on terrorism in Canada. So a little while later, Beryl Wiseman, who was the editor of the Suburban, came to me and said, "Hey, you want to write some local stuff?" I said, "Sure," because it is the heart and soul of journalism. The paper's got 250,000 readers because it has a high pass-along every week, and it does make an impact. Andrea?
So I'm an associate editor at Maisonneuve magazine. Are people familiar with Maisonneuve magazine? Pretty familiar? Okay. It's a general interest national magazine based here in Montreal. I just moved here actually in September to join the editorial team there, and I also freelance. I tend to like to do more longer features, magazine features. So I've written for The Walrus, for Maisonneuve, for the Globe and Mail, for the Atlantic in the States, and a number of other places. I have a culture column for this magazine, just based out of Toronto. But I don't actually come from a journalism background. I did an MFA in creative writing at the University of British Columbia and sort of came into the journalism world through some sort of exit door. I don't really know. We had a really great prof at UBC, Andrea Schroeder, who taught a nonfiction course, and there's a little bit of like a border war between writing and journalism in the like magazine writing area. So I came in from the creative writing side, pretty much just because everyone loved Andrea Schroeder's class. I started out my MFA as a poet. I still am a poet. I have a poetry book. Everyone loved this class, so I took it. And then happened upon a story that ended up being published in Maisonneuve. It was a feature story about a Christian co-op housing organization in the downtown east side in Vancouver that had received public money but was attempting to evict a tenant based on religious differences. I'm really interested in both religion and politics and injustices and that kind of stuff. So I happened upon this story, and then the story just kept getting bigger, and I really actually learned how to report based on like what I needed to tell that story. Like, oh, how do I file in a FOIA? How do I get the information that I need? And yeah, essentially started out my career almost by funding my own journalism, which is like what you do as a freelancer when you're starting out if you're interested in doing like feature-length stuff. You don't necessarily get paid a lot per word, and like you might put more money into the story than you end up getting back for it, which is slightly heartbreaking. But that's the type of story I'm good at telling, and there are a few outlets in the country that pay enough money to support that type of journalism. So I've tried to find those as I move on. Yeah, should I say a little bit more about my background, or is that okay?
It's interesting.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad is actually in English and French, and I did it at the University of Guelph, which is mostly known for its agriculture program. And while I was living in Guelph, there's an arts organization there called Kazoo, which is mostly music, but also other art stuff. Most of my friends were musicians. But I was not a musician, and we started a little zine called the Kazine, and we started a zine fair. So I had made zines, and my undergrad was English and French, and somehow this turned into a communications job for me because I had taught myself in design, and because I speak French, so I got like an NGO communications job, which after about 18 months, all the people were great. It paid a salary and like benefits and things of that nature. This was before 2000, just as the market crash was about to happen, and I left to do an MFA. Very smart idea. And then I got into like the literary magazine world on the strength of like knowing InDesign and having opinions about what I liked and didn't like, and also just sort of, because of my interests, paying a lot of attention to who was writing stuff that I liked, which I think like we'll probably talk about networking a little bit, but yeah, when I think about networking, I think about it in sort of like a peer type of way. Like I'm looking to make connections with people in the event that I ever have something to offer them, or if I'm ever in a position to reach out to someone to be like, hey, I really like your stuff, can I publish it? So I worked as an editor for Prism on the West Coast, which is just a little literary magazine, and then as a news columns editor for this magazine in Toronto, which is sort of like a left-leaning magazine, and was writing for Maisonneuve, and I don't know exactly how I got the Maisonneuve job. I applied, I guess. That's how that works. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I am.
Great. Okay, so you've both had experiences freelancing. do you want to go through what the day in the life of a freelancer is like? Like, can you talk about your experience working as a freelancer?
Good. Part of me is thinking though that like the most important takeaway for anybody for the handful of people who are actually thinking of doing this is that ultimately in this job it's not about what it does for us. Ultimately you're writing to your reader, your web surfer. You're writing to your viewer. You're writing to your listener, your reader. Those are the people who, and you have to know whom it is you're writing to. So when I'm writing for the New York Times, I know I'm writing for an urbane, mostly American audience, very interested in public policy, want to have a very clear idea of where the world is heading on the macro level. At the Suburban, on the hyper-local side, I know that I'm writing to a readership that is very much interested in what's going on around them in their community, and sometimes, often feels aggrieved at some of the public policy that they see going on around them. So similarly for you, you're looking at this as, what does it mean to me? Rather than listening necessarily to me talk all about myself. And so to me the important thing here is where, if you're interested in reporting, if you're interested in doing coverage, the world has changed. It's not the journeyman, spend 3 years going to a journalism school, get a job writing, try to figure out and learn about whatever you want to write. Basically, the internet has made everyone a publisher. J.K. Liebling, famous American war correspondent, said freedom of the press belongs to the man who owns one. It was before you had the language. And it's true. Now anybody with internet access essentially has a printing press with worldwide reach. And that's changed the whole equation. That's what Jesse was talking about earlier. And it's changed the way that you will work in that field. And freelancing, working for your own, is going to be increasingly a big part of that. But to do it, you're going to have something to bring to the table, or as the editor of Suburban says, you have to know stuff. And stuff can mean, those of you from McGill here, you don't have a journalism program, coming from all kinds of different walks, economics, philosophy, religious studies, fine arts, and I was thrilled to hear Andrea talk about her fine arts background, because the field of journalism is not limited to somebody with a journalism degree. Yes, you have to have a certain amount of writing skills and understanding of the ethos and natural curiosity. You're going to take that and you're going to have to bring with you a whole lot of optimism, because if you're a pessimist, it's probably better to go into accounting or some other field where it's a nice regulated future. You have to, because the world is constantly going to be shifting, and you're going to meet one obstacle. You're always going to have to be thinking of the next thing that you're going to do to be able to find an opportunity there. I've talked too much about it.
Day in the life, that's an interesting question. So I feel like there are probably a lot of freelancers who make their income from writing, editing, copy editing, and fact checking, some combination of those things. I personally don't. So the day in life is like slightly like, I'm focused on like the stories I want to tell on one hand, and then on the other hand I'm focused on like paying my rent, and I kind of do like whatever is necessary in order to do that. So I don't have a perfect freelancer mentality actually, and I'm not like the most entrepreneurial. I don't care enough about money like at all. I don't have a very good hustle. If you want to be a freelancer and make your living, you have to learn how to like hustle really well. I don't care to hustle. I'm like really, when I publish a story, I want to be able to stand behind it, and I really only like doing features. Like I'll write shorter stuff, but I really only like doing features. And it's hard to make a living doing that in Canada. If you want to do that as your goal, I would say like try from the very get-go to like broaden your scope and get into like American publications because there are a lot more of them. If you're interested in like cultural writing, if you're interested in, just find something you're interested in. And there's stuff that's easier to write quickly about, and then there's other stuff that, you know, some of the stories I've written have taken like 1.5 years to report, and I've had to kind of like wait for them to unroll. So anyway, a day in the life, like yesterday, is today Thursday? Yesterday, I'm also a bike mechanic, so yesterday I like went on an interview, hands-on interview for bike mechanics to perhaps work as a bike mechanic in Montreal. And today, actually, like I'm writing an essay about women and gender variant people in bike mechanics. So the past couple of days, I've also been interviewing people about their experiences in the bike mechanic world. I don't always write personal stuff. I don't love writing personal stuff, but when you have knowledge about something, it gives you a bit of an edge. Like I know where to find the sources for certain things, and I think that's something to like keep in mind too. And increasingly, we were talking a little bit about like the rebel earlier that came up in like the increasingly like the. Not necessarily the rebel, but there's been like a blurring of lines between like what constitutes journalism and what constitutes like advocacy journalism. Writers care a little less about that, or like there's an acceptance of like personal journalism, and I usually figure myself as a writer, but then sometimes I am writing investigative stuff and I try to keep myself out of it as much as possible. I don't want to be the story. And then sometimes I write stories where I'm at the center of the story. My day looks very different day to day. I try to take weekends off now that I'm living in Montreal, land of reasonable rent. I came from Vancouver via New York. So I used to work 6 or 7 days a week, but now I'm trying to keep it to 5. I adopted a cat. I'm trying to have a life, but I don't know. I don't know. There are ways of making a living, I think, for sure, from freelancing. And